David Hackney is someone who separates himself by leading with courage, with honesty, with vulnerability. If you've been in this space right here, or if you've been in any space with us before and you've seen him and heard him talk, he tells his story and he talks about the things he's had to overcome to get to where he is. And that kind of honesty, that kind of openness is really honestly what we're looking for when we're talking about folks who are in the legislature, right? People who are representatives, right? This is who we are. So please give me a round of applause and help me welcome David Hackney.
Thanks, my friend. Well, good morning. It's a pleasure to be here. The parking situation was definitely a challenge, but fortunately I was able to make it. So again, my name is David Hackney. I represent the 11th Legislative District, which is Tukwila, Renton, and Kent. But that's not why I'm here. I'm here because when I was elected to the legislature, I wanted to work on things that were easy, where people would be very happy to hear about it. I wanted to work on clean energy. I wanted to work on hydrogen. I wanted to work on education for children. I wanted to work on things where everybody would agree. But that's not how it worked out. Actually, Representative Tara Simmons, I'm not sure if Representative Simmons is here, she approached me, this is during the time of COVID, and said, with your background, it would be excellent if you got involved in some of this sentencing reform issues. And I thought about it for a second, and then I realized that is actually what I was called to do in the legislature. That's not how I ran. That's not how I campaigned. I would have, would have preferred to take issues that were less controversial, where almost everybody agreed, but then I wouldn't really be making a difference. So over the period of time, of the 6 years I've been in the legislature, I have had the privilege of getting to know individuals with, as they say, lived experience, and not just casually. I have gotten a very close relationship with the executive director here, Chris Blackwell, others, Matthew Leon, Jacob Smith, Rory, who's here, and I have learned more from those individuals than I ever did in school, than I ever did in college, law school, or graduate school. I recognize that in my background, I spent 11 years as a federal prosecutor with the U.S. Department of Justice. I was the problem. I was mass incarceration. I didn't even blink, sending individuals away for decades of imprisonment. And the federal system, like Washington, has no parole. If you are sentenced to an extremely long sentence, you will serve every day of it, except for a little bit of good time, unless you get pardoned by the president. And I did not even for a second take a thought about these individuals, how this incarceration impacted them, how it impacted their families, how it impacted their communities. See, when you're a prosecutor, you don't get to know the people that you prosecute. They're a file. They're someone sitting across the table. All you know about them is their criminal history and the facts of the crime. And when I was successful and able to get a long sentence and a conviction, I would go back to the office and people would high five. I never for a second did I sit back and reflect, does that make any sense? In our system of justice at the federal level, if you have a prior criminal record, you can often double minimum mandatory sentences. All I had to do was file a simple piece of paper. I didn't have to get the permission of a judge, a supervisor, a probation officer. If I filed this piece of paper, your 5-year minimum mandatory is 10. Your 10-year minimum mandatory is 20. If there were any firearms involved, I could start adding 7 years. 7 years for every firearm. Minimum mandatory consecutive. The judge had no discretion. I sentenced individuals for extremely long periods of time. I shudder to think now. I shudder to think about some of these individuals who are now probably getting into their old age. They're in federal institutions, probably need assistance walking, right? So need assistance getting around. They're of no danger to anyone. Yet we're spending all this time and money to keep them incarcerated 24/7. We're keeping them away from their family, from their children who could learn from them, from their community who could learn from their experiences. All for what? Punishment? They've been punished. They've been punished. And now, because of this experience, as I transitioned into the legislature, I got to meet people with lived experience. I got to sit down and talk with Chris Blackwell. I got to sit down and get to meet Eugene Youngblood and get to really spend time with him. Matthew Leon, again, more than you can tell. I speak to Chris Blackwell and Matthew Leon on the phone, who are currently incarcerated, more than I do my whole family. I have learned so much from them. I've learned from their wives. I've learned how it impacts their family. I've also learned the most important lesson. People are often better than the worst thing they ever did. These individuals, the ability to start this organization and bring us all together so we can live and learn from each other, that's amazing. This is all not for themselves. This is not just for them to make a case for clemency. They are doing service to others in some ways to make up for the harm they caused. And I'm trying to do service myself to make up for the harm that I caused. It wasn't intentional. But if I knew then what I know now. See, when I was a prosecutor, I thought I was different than the people that I prosecuted. Thought I was better. I would have never done that. I would have never done that. You know, I'm up here hitting triples. I didn't hit a triple. I was born on third base. I didn't live in a family where I had issues of safety and security. I wasn't abused like that. I had every opportunity possible that you could give a person, and I still acted a fool. I still misbehaved. But, you know, and I think what people don't really understand, and this is a little controversial, in America, it's much more about economic class than race. I mean, I've always been black, but I grew up in a middle-class suburb. I went to a private high school, and when we got in trouble, and we did, baseball bats destroying mailboxes, a federal offense, you know what our punishment was? Called our football coach, we ran sprints after practice. I'm not going to go into more details, but I had some other adventures as well.
What about the statute of limitations?
There you go.
Take it anytime.
Anytime, there you go.
Be careful.
That's right. But I would just say, but again, as suburban kids, we didn't get the same attention from law enforcement. People recognize that we were just kids, and the kids do stupid things, and that we had potential to do better. And I think we should do that for all children. So I've had the privilege of sponsoring legislation about juvenile points, about not holding people liable in adult court for their criminal history as juveniles. As juveniles, we don't have any sense. Do you recognize you can't rent a car under 25? They don't care how much money you give them. The rental car company's like, nope, it's not worth it. The car's too valuable and you have too little sense. So I just recognize now, so the juvenile points, the second chance bill for individuals that have been convicted for very serious crimes under the age of 25, giving them an opportunity to go before the Independent Sentence Review Board or Indeterminate Sentence Review Board. One of the things that I'm here for is that I think it is bad public policy for the state of Washington to have a criminal justice system that does not take into account how people behave while they're incarcerated. As a prosecutor, all you know is someone's criminal history and the facts of the crime. After they've spent a significant amount of time in custody, you have a lot more relevant information about that individual. Are they taking classes? Are they bettering themselves? Are they mentoring other people inside the system? Are they starting organizations? Are they publishing articles? Are they publishing books? Are they doing things to help society better itself? For those that are, they have earned the right to come home. And I am going to sit and I'm going to work with them side by side until they do. Thank you.
So next up is our keynote speaker, Mr. Chesa Boudin. Chesa Boudin is one of the most courageous and forward-thinking voices in American justice today. As the former district attorney for San Francisco, he didn't step into office to hand out the longest sentences. He stepped in to rethink what justice could be. And along the way, he realized something profound. A prosecutor's true job isn't punishment, it's finding the place where healing and accountability meet. Today, Chesa is the founding executive director of the Berkeley Criminal Law and Justice Center, where he leads one of the nation's most important hubs for research, policy, and transformative advocacy. He's helping the country reimagine justice with evidence, humanity, and a relentless commitment to the truth. As we move forward and we listen to the words, I just want you to know that he's not a person who's just speaking words. He's a person who's, if you come from the community I come from, you're gonna really feel me when I say this. He come from a place where he's putting in work, right? Like he's putting work in, right? Like for real, he's putting work in. He's not just talking about it, he's being about it. So do me a favor and let's put some work in and clap it up and give a good introduction for Mr. Chesa Boudin.
Thank you, Youngblood. I really appreciate the introduction, the warm welcome, seeing so many familiar faces and meeting some new friends while I'm here today. Also appreciate that there's somebody rocking a bow tie. Respect. I see you. I appreciate you. A lot of people don't know how to tie one of those, so, you know. I had to wait till my second federal clerkship before I learned, and the judge I clerked for would wear a bow tie every day, and he was like, you cannot finish your clerkship with me if you don't know how to tie a bow tie. I was going to start off just by thanking my wife, who's not here today, both because it's always a good idea to thank your wife, but also because she's home looking after our two kids. And I really couldn't be here if she weren't stepping up to do that, and today is our wedding anniversary. So, thank you. So I say that because it's a real testament to her commitment to this work and to this community and to the values that I know we all share and that bring us together on a Saturday when we all could be doing other things, right? This is important. This is important to all of us and to all of our families and to all of our extended communities. I was also going to thank Christopher for inviting me and for the work that he does from behind bars. Work that many of us on the outside, where the sky is the limit, aren't able to achieve what he achieves, or to have the kind of impact that he has, the kind of reach that he has, to bring together the kind of community that we see in this room today. But I decided I'm not going to thank him. And the reason I'm not going to thank him is because in his welcoming remarks, he took all of the points that I was about to make. All of them. I'm listening, I'm like, yeah, true. Oh, wait, I was going to say that. Wait, no, true. What am I going to say? So he kind of left me up here without, a whole lot to work with. He took the wind out of my sails, as they say. But I appreciate him for it. And I like to think that great minds think alike. He asked me to talk to you all today about the true costs of incarceration. And, I could think about all the stories I can tell. I'll tell some stories. But when he said that to me, I'm like, well, who's going to be in the audience? Because as I look around this room, I know that probably any one of you could get up here and talk to us about the true cost of incarceration. I know that every one of you has your own personal experience, even if you weren't yourself incarcerated. And in some ways, that's a testament to who we are in this room. But even more, it speaks to the reality of mass incarceration in this country and how profoundly and how broadly it touches all of us. So recognizing that any one of you could probably be up here giving this speech, I'm going to do my best to earn and hold on to your attention over the next 25 minutes or so. Look, when we talk about costs, Christopher already did this to some extent in his speech, so I'm not going to repeat what he said. But the dollar figures are so astronomical. I think the number he quoted was $3.5 trillion over the next 10 years. There's much more conservative estimates that may say $100 billion a year. Depends how you count the cost. A lot of ways to slice and dice the numbers. But what I can tell you is this, regardless of how you slice the numbers, the amount that we spend in this country on incarceration, even if measured conservatively, is more than enough to pay for things like universal preschool education. More than enough to pay for universal access to mental health treatment and drug treatment on demand. It's more than enough to pay for people to go to universities and colleges for free. We've got some students from the University of Washington over here. I bet they'd like that. I mean, we've all heard the statistics about how it costs more to keep somebody incarcerated than to send them to Harvard. I went to Yale, so I'm a little biased, but still. Those statistics and those numbers are stark, and they're real. And they say a lot about our values and our priorities as a country. So it's important that we remember them. But I think everybody in this room already is familiar with those statistics. So I want to talk about a different element of the costs of mass incarceration today. I want to talk about things that don't show up on any government balance sheet or budget or ledger. I want to talk about the human costs, the social costs, the moral costs of mass incarceration. When I was 14 months old, I was a baby, my parents left me at the home of a babysitter. It was like any other day when they went to work. The same person who looked after me. But this wasn't any other day. My parents didn't go to work that day. After they dropped me off, they went to participate in an armed robbery. It was organized by a group called the Black Liberation Army, and my parents were driving a switch car, not even the getaway car from the scene of the robbery itself. Things went really wrong out of the gate. A security guard for the Brinks truck was shot and killed. And when the U-Haul van that my parents were driving was pulled over, 2 police officers were shot and killed. Neither one of my parents came to pick me up that day. They were both arrested. My mother was sentenced years later to 20 years to life. My father was sentenced to 75 years to life. Now, I don't remember their arrest. I don't remember the trial that my father had or the moment when the judge imposed those long sentences on my parents. Instead, like so many millions of American children, my first memories are waiting in line to go through metal detectors, to go through steel gates, to get searched and patted down by correctional officers, just to be able to see my parents, just to be able to give them a hug, to touch them. And so when we talk about the cost of incarceration, I want to remind all of us, and I know people in this room are well aware, we're not just talking about dollars. We're talking about decades of missed birthdays parties. We're talking about missed graduations, missed soccer games and t-ball games. We're talking about emotional trauma that comes with the physical, geographic, as well as emotional distance that incarceration creates between those on the inside and the families and communities that they leave behind. Now, I used to think that my experience was unique. And in some of the spaces I've been privileged to occupy, like Yale and Yale Law School and the Rhodes Scholarship, it is a unique experience. But we know, again, Christopher took this one from me, but I'm going to repeat it. We know that in this country, mass incarceration is so prevalent, is so widespread, that fully half of adults have an immediate family member who's currently or formerly incarcerated. It's not a unique experience. What I went through is something that literally tens of millions of American children go through. And one of the things I noticed really early on in those prison visits, even before I had ever heard the term mass incarceration, or before my parents, even with their radical politics coming out of the Weather Underground and the Black Liberation Army, had a chance to explain to me what institutionalized racism meant, I started to notice that the lines to get into those prisons were mostly black and brown women and children. Now, I say this as a reminder that the costs, however we measure them, are not borne equally, are not distributed equally. And it's funny because, a lot of the billionaires that drive the tough on crime rhetoric and push these policies that are so destructive like to complain about their tax burden and how they pay too many taxes. Well, first of all, keep your money. We don't want you building more jails and prisons. We don't need the money to go to that. But second of all, let's remember that the costs imposed by those expenditures are also not borne equally. They're borne very unequally in ways that actually amplify existing disparities in our communities, in ways that actually undermine public safety. So I want to talk a little bit about that today as some of the costs. I want to tell another story. I mentioned a moment ago the black and brown women and children that I saw every day in line to go in to my parents' prisons. And look, my parents did a lot of time. So I spent decades visiting them in prison. And I learned some hard lessons along the way. I'm going to tell you a couple stories that helped me learn these lessons, but let me just kind of summarize in brief what these lessons were. Because they're the same things that led me to run for office back in 2019. They're the same things that I campaigned on when I ran for district attorney, right? And these lessons, they're complicated. They're years of visiting prisons, of knowing people in prison, of learning to love and to forgive my parents despite the harm that they caused to me and to an entire community. But these are lessons that can be boiled down into three really, really simple messages. The first one is that we incarcerate too many people, right? It's a simple lesson. And so when I ran for office, I campaigned first and foremost on prioritizing alternatives to incarceration, diversion, restorative justice, drug treatment, things that actually get at the root causes of crime so we can be proactive instead of reactive. That's a far more effective way to build safety than constructing another prison. The second thing that I realized through all these years of visiting my parents in prison was that all this money and all of this punishment is often justified in the name of victims and survivors of crime. But prosecutors too often are treating survivors as nothing more than a piece of evidence to help them secure a conviction. That we are not putting our money where our mouth is when it comes to helping people heal from the trauma and harm that crime causes. And in fact, many of the people that are being prosecuted today were victims of crime yesterday. And all of a sudden, prosecutors don't seem to care about what they went through. Once the case is over, once the conviction is secured, the sentence imposed, too often prosecutors move on. No more support, no more trauma therapy, and in many jurisdictions, prosecutors will actually jail victims of crime. That's right, jail the victims. You want to talk about the cost of incarceration? They will put survivors of rape or domestic violence or witnesses to homicides in a cage so that they can be available as a material witness on a moment's notice to testify to help prosecutors secure that conviction. That's how we treat victims, even though so much punishment and so much harm and so much expenditure is justified in their names. The third lesson that I learned that was really telling and really defined in many ways my time in office and what precipitated my exit from public politics was that we don't have a justice system in this country. We have two justice systems, right? We have one for the wealthy and the well-connected, for people who wear uniforms and badges, and another system of justice for the rest of us. And that impunity is more and more transparent every day, given the politics of the current administration. But it's been true. It has been true for decades. It's been true for generations. And it makes a mockery of the words that are etched in stone above the United States Supreme Court and every courthouse in America, right? Equal justice under law. Well, not if there's consequences for us, but impunity for them. And that is how it has worked for tax evaders, for corporate fraudsters. There is more money stolen by corporations from misclassification of workers and wrongful withholding of wages every year than there is from shoplifting. But you don't hear moral panic about wage theft. You hear it about shoplifting, right? So this is a defining problem in our country's culture around punishment and mass incarceration. So what are the human costs? I promised you I was going to talk about that. Like so many children with incarcerated parents, I didn't start off on a path that would have led anybody to expect I was going to go to Yale or law school or anything like that. I got in a lot of trouble when I was young. I had a lot of behavioral issues. I was angry. I felt a sense of stigma and shame. I acted out. I got in trouble in school. I got suspended in school. And like Representative Hackney, I was lucky to have second chances and third chances, chances that a lot of other people who grow up in less fortunate circumstances don't get. But I want to tell you about one of the people I became friends with, who I met in line going into my mother's prison. There was a young man named Lorenzo. And unlike me, he was black. Unlike me, he was an immigrant to this country. And like me, his mother was serving a long prison sentence. While my mom was there for a violent crime, felony murder, his mother was there under New York State's harsh Rockefeller drug law mandatory minimum sentences. Another casualty of the war on drugs. Well, Lorenzo was a couple years older than me. And when I was getting suspended from school, Lorenzo was getting straight A's. While I was having temper tantrums, Lorenzo was winning statewide writing contests, literally won a trip to Egypt, paid for by New York State because his writing was so good when he was in middle school, literally. My mother used to say to me on prison visits, Chesa, can't you be more like Lorenzo? Like, come on, like, you know, get it together. He was the star of the basketball team. And he was patient with me. I mean, he was older, he didn't need to make time, but on those visits, when I would run and hide in the boys' bathroom, knowing my mother couldn't come get me, like she would send Lorenzo to talk me down so we could take advantage of the rest of our prison visit. Well, this is a long time ago. This is before Facebook or social media or WhatsApp or any of that kind of thing. And over the years, Lorenzo and I started visiting our mothers in prison on different days. My family moved to Chicago, his stayed in East Brooklyn, and we fell out of touch. Years passed, and I got my act together, and I got accepted to Yale College. My freshman year, I'm in my dorm, and I get a letter from my dad. My dad says in this letter, comes with the stamp from the correctional facility on the outside, and I open the letter up, and it's his usual kind of handwritten yellow legal pad paper. And my dad says in this letter, he says, Chesa, I just met somebody on the prison yard who says he's a friend of yours. His name's Lorenzo. Do you know him? And I'm like, wait, how am I at Yale and he's locked up behind bars? He had all the potential and more that I had as a kid. He had the brains and the energy and the discipline and the charisma. How is it that this talent and this human potential is sitting in a cage? So I started researching the disparities in our criminal justice. I started looking at the role race plays and the role class plays and the role immigration status plays. And I went to visit Lorenzo. And I'm not going to tell you the whole story, but what I want to tell you happened next, because it's really relevant to what we're doing in this country today. Lorenzo, as I said, was not born in the United States. And so when he served his 5 years on a nonviolent offense, which had been doubled up because of a juvenile prior, again, to Representative Hackney's point, when Lorenzo served that 5 years, he didn't get released from New York State prison. He got handed over to ICE. And he got put in an immigration detention facility. Now, I wasn't a lawyer at the time, and I didn't really know how to help my friend. I went to visit him in immigration detention, did our best to fight his case, but ultimately he was removed to Guyana. I went to visit him there. I gave him a small loan to start a business. I saw the conditions he was living in Guyana, a country that he had never known. He was born there, but he never knew that country. He didn't have roots or family there. He was a New Yorker. And I saw the kind of desperate, he didn't have glass in his window frames where he was living. Literally in a swamp with mosquitoes, no glass in the window frames. That's the conditions that we deported him to. This young man who had won a statewide prize, who had all the potential as a basketball player, as a mentor to me and others in the prison visiting room. So that's just one example. I'm going to come back to Lorenzo, but that's one example of the costs of incarceration, right? The wasted human potential, the lives destroyed, the intergenerational cycle of incarceration that we create when we lock parents up, when we take them away from their kids and their communities. But the other thing, when we talk about money, when we talk about the drive to invest in prisons and to create this entire private industry of, Global Tellink and Securus and Core Civic and Geo Group, all of these publicly traded companies that are profiting to the tune of billions of dollars, not just off of tax dollars in the criminal justice system in mass incarceration, but also off of the families of those who can least afford to pay the bills, right? Families who are forced to choose between accepting that collect phone call so that their kids can speak with their incarcerated father or paying their rent. Those are the costs of incarceration. And what they do as a ripple effect to us is they deprive local communities of the resources that are needed to actually build safety. So Representative Hackney spoke about what safe communities look like. He spoke about what happens to kids who do stupid things in those communities. And we all know, I've got 2 sons at home, right? My wife is helping take care of them today so I can be with you. I don't want my sons to grow up in a neighborhood that has police on every corner, that has flashing blue lights and cameras. Nobody wants that. I want my sons to grow up in a neighborhood where there's good public schools, where there's easy access to healthcare and mental health services and drug treatment for people who stray down a bad path. I want my kids to grow up in a neighborhood where there are lots of green spaces for them to play. Right? I remember growing up in Chicago as a kid, there was a drive-by shooting in the park across the street from my house. I was playing t-ball at the time. And the shooting happened on the basketball courts just on the other side of the park. And the response by the so-called tough-on-crime authorities to this drive-by shooting in a park was to take down the basketball hoops. Right? Those are the costs of mass incarceration. Those are the costs of the mentality that the only way we can build safety is by doing things that we know undermine safety in the long run and create violence. Look, another example from research, from documented causal studies done by some of the most respected economists in the country. When we take people arrested on low-level crimes and we put them in cages, we make the likelihood of future crime higher, not lower. Literally incarcerating people in these circumstances increases the risk of future crime. It makes us less safe at a tremendous economic and emotional and community and moral cost. I want to just ask for a second, let's just think about what the toll that this approach takes on all of us. Forget the budgets, forget the dollars. What does it mean that we as a country can incarcerate more than 2 million people on any given day and just shrug and just go on with business as usual? What does it mean not just for those of us who've been incarcerated or have loved ones incarcerated, but for the correctional officers and the staff, the millions of people who work in jails and prisons and ICE detention facilities, who have to carry the tremendous trauma of treating other human beings as though they are less than? It's no surprise that rates of domestic violence and alcoholism and DUIs and suicide are so much higher among staff members in carceral facilities. The way that we are treating other human beings is not human, and it brings all of us down, morally and emotionally. It's easy in this moment, in this political moment, with Trump in the White House, with people like me getting recalled from office, with Mike Schmidt in Portland, George Gascon in Los Angeles, the headlines across the country will tell you that criminal justice reform is dying or dead, that it's on the retreat, that voters want tough on crime politicians and politics. So it's easy to kind of give up. It's easy to kind of feel like, we've lost this battle. But I want to just say, as we talk about costs, the costs to giving up are too high. They are too high. And I want to push back on the narrative that we're losing. And you might be surprised, those of you that know my story, I got recalled from office. I didn't even finish my first term. So how am I up here telling you that we're winning? Well, pay attention, because I'm about to break it down. The victories that I'm about to describe, I want to be clear, they require creativity. They require perseverance. They require a willingness to try and fail. They require a belief in the fact that sometimes we will have success without victory in these struggles and in these campaigns. They didn't happen because they were easy or obvious or inevitable, but they happened. So let me tell you a few success stories. All right, first of all, we have cut the prison population in this country nearly in half in many states, California and New York among them. Now, we still incarcerate too many people. But the notion, 25 years ago, when I was in college, that we could somehow elect people like Representative Hackney or Anderson, people who would proactively legislate to decrease incarceration, was unthinkable. The notion that we could ever have prison populations falling and falling by double digits was unthinkable. We have made tremendous progress in very short time. We have normalized the idea that criminal justice reform legislation is a good thing, that it's politically safe and wise. We have also seen a massive popular culture shift. Concepts like mass incarceration, which nobody outside of the fringe activist, directly impacted communities had even heard of 20 years ago, are now being talked about on mainstream corporate media. That is a win, that is a shift, that is hard-won gains, a foundation that all of our work can continue to stand on and build on and grow on. I want to also say that a lot of the things that are being held out as big losses, the kind of concrete pieces of evidence that pundits point to say, see, criminal justice reform is dead. It hit its high watermark in 2020. Things like my recall are being grossly misrepresented to all of us, and many of us are falling for it. So let me give you just a couple of concrete, really important recent examples. I'll start with my own. I got recalled. So a lot of people say, look, even progressive San Francisco has had enough of criminal justice reform. Well, I'm not here to be defensive or tell you what, it was unfair or they did me dirty or where'd the money come from. All that is true. You can read about it if you want. I'm over it, right? But here's the point that's important as we think about narrative and where we are today and where we're going. San Francisco uses ranked choice voting. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but what I want you to understand is I got elected in 2019 with 35% of the voters putting me as their first choice. If you include the people that put me as second and third choice on their ballots, I had 42% of the vote. I mean, if you put me as third choice, you weren't that stoked about me winning, let's be honest. Right? Come on. Now, 2 years later, after a COVID pandemic and a $10 million attack campaign funded by right-wing folks like David Sachs that are now in the Trump White House, I got 45% of the vote to stay in office. But it wasn't enough, you see, because I wasn't running against any other candidate. I was running against myself. I was running against the hypothetical, imaginary, best alternative any voter could think of. There was no way I was getting from 35% in 2019 to 50% in 2022. But we grew our base of support nevertheless. And if you look at polling, people who said they hated me loved the things I was doing. Police accountability, innocence commissions, not prosecuting juveniles as adults, moving away from 3 strikes and gang enhancements, expanding diversion programs, expanding drug treatment. Right? All of that was and remains wildly popular with voters. I'll give you one other concrete example, more recent, also from California. In the last election, Californians overwhelmingly passed a proposition called Prop 36. Prop 36 basically increased punishment for low-level theft and increased punishment for low-level drugs. Made both of those kinds of crimes punishable by felony incarceration in state prison. Massive setback. And a lot of pundits are saying, see, across the state, every county, every demographic group is voting for this. It shows that criminal justice reform has peaked and is in decline. And it feels that way to a lot of us reformers. It feels like a major setback. It feels like, where do we go wrong? What do we do around our messaging? Well, let me tell you what they did around their messaging that tells us all you need to know about what's happening. They did not campaign for Prop 36 by saying this is a tough on crime measure that's going to lock more people up for longer. They didn't use the talking points that were used in 1996 when Bill Clinton passed all of his draconian tough on crime legislation, or when Boudin passed his draconian tough on crime federal 3 strikes or mandatory minimums for crack cocaine. They didn't use the rhetoric that was used in California when we passed 3 strikes back in '92, right? That was tough on crime rhetoric. What they said last year in California, across the state, was this ballot measure will help address homelessness and get drug users treatment. It was a lie. It was a lie. Just like the people who recalled me said they wanted progressive prosecution, they just thought they could do it better. It was a lie. But the lie tells you what you need to know about where voters are at. Voters believe in and want criminal justice reform, and our leaders are failing to deliver opportunities. They are failing to give them alternatives. If there had been a ballot measure alongside Prop 36, if there had been a Prop 37 that actually funded drug treatment, that actually funded meaningful alternatives to incarceration, voters would have voted for that too. That is what the polls tell us voters want, and we need elected officials who will deliver it. All right, so I want to wrap up by talking about just a couple of very personal wins. I talked about the policy stuff, I talked about the electoral stuff, but I want to remind us that at the bottom of all these statistics and numbers, there are real human beings. So I want to talk about Lorenzo. Lorenzo spent about 20 years in Guyana and then Trinidad, but he never gave up. I told you, I went to visit him in Guyana. I gave him a couple $1,000 to start a business. He started another business. He worked as a construction worker, hired a crew of guys building houses. He never gave up. And despite having multiple criminal convictions, despite having been out of the country for 20 years after removal, in 2022, Lorenzo was able to come back into this country and get his green card restored. He's living in New York doing violence interruption work and finishing his bachelor's degree right now as we speak. And the work that my team of students and lawyers at Berkeley Law School is doing today is also having important wins. I want to tell you just about one case from last week. We do a lot of different kinds of work, and I'm happy to talk more about it. But one of the things we started doing this year, because of our recognition of where this country was heading at a federal level, was we launched what's called a practicum, a class where we teach students how to work on actual cases. And even though everything we do is connected to criminal justice, we knew that the frontline growth space for mass incarceration was going to be immigration detention. And so we started a project where our students represent detained immigrants and fight to get them out of custody. And we knew we were going to lose more than we were going to win. We knew that the law was moving in a bad direction, that the federal government was firing the immigration judges that were ruling in our favor, that there was tremendous political pressure against federal judges to grant any kind of relief. But we decided that those were important cases to take up, for our students to learn, and for people sitting in immigration detention to know that even if we didn't win, we were fighting for them. Well, we started representing a young man who was seeking asylum, who was Muslim, and who was being persecuted because of his faith in his home country. He'd come here, he'd claimed asylum. His asylum case was in process through the immigration courts. And ICE decided to detain him. His wife is pregnant with their first child. She's due November 25th, this month, 10 days. So we filed a temporary restraining order request with the federal court. And we got nervous because the court said, no, we're not going to treat it with the emergency kind of stature that a TRO requires. We're going to treat it as a preliminary injunction. It's a slower schedule. We got a little nervous. We felt like this was an emergency. There's no reason for him to be incarcerated. His family needs him. The costs, literally every day, to his wife are real. And then the judge denied our request to have a hearing in front of him. We thought, this is a really bad time. We want to get up in court. We want to argue. We want to at least be able to make the case to the court. And then at the end of last week, the judge issued a written order in which he required ICE to immediately release our client. He didn't send it back to an immigration judge. He didn't say we want to have some further evidentiary hearing. He said this person must be released from custody now. And I'm just thrilled to say that he's back home with his wife and she hasn't given birth yet. So there are real wins. I'm going to give you one last personal one, which is that my dad, with a 75-year minimum sentence, came home after 40 years. He didn't just come home, he transferred his parole to California to be closer to us. He successfully completed parole in just a couple of years. And literally today, he's going to go help my wife with the boys so that I can be here with you and so that he can make up for the time he wasn't able to spend with me. So the question that I want to leave you with is not whether we can afford to or figure out the ways to dismantle mass incarceration, but whether we can afford not to. Whether we can afford to give up the fight, whether we can afford to sit back on our heels and get complacent or give up or grow cynical or depressed. Every day that we wait, every day that we fight amongst ourselves, every day that we struggle to figure out how to move forward, the costs compound, and the costs are real. It's not just about dollars. It's about the kinds of lives that all of you in this room know are touched every day, that we rely on mass incarceration for things that could and should be solved through more effective and more humane alternatives. Now, I know how easy it is to feel like we're losing ground in this moment, and I don't want to sugarcoat it. There is no question that there has been tremendous damage done in the last year alone, irreparable harm. But at the same time, we cannot lose sight of how far we've come. We can never forget that progress isn't linear, and that these battles would have been won decades ago by our elders if they were easy battles to win. So don't give up hope. Take stock of how far we've come, of how much we've achieved, and let's keep going. Thank you.